Winter came early in the mountains of Montana, as it often did, without warning or mercy. The cold settled into the high passes long before most people prepared for it, pressing down on the land and narrowing the world to what could be endured step by step. Martha Ives moved along a thin, winding road that cut through the pass, her boots slipping on frozen ground, her breath forming briefly in the air before vanishing. She led a tired horse by the reins, its head lowered, its strength nearly spent, each step slower than the last. All that remained of her former life was tied into a single worn bag slung over her shoulder. Inside it were a few changes of clothes, a notebook with pages half used and half blank, and several letters she had never found the courage to tear apart or leave behind. They were light as paper, yet they weighed heavily against her side, a quiet reminder of choices already made and doors already closed. She was leaving a town that no longer spoke her name without hesitation. In its streets, people had learned to look through her rather than at her, their silence sharper than open rejection. What had once been familiar had turned tight and narrow, pushing her out without ceremony. She had not waited for permission to go. She had only taken what she could carry and followed the road north, away from accusation, explanation, and rooms where she no longer belonged. The further she climbed, the more distant that town became, though not in her thoughts. The past kept pace with her, close and persistent, moving like a second shadow just beyond her line of sight. She felt it in the ache of her shoulders, in the careful way she avoided memory, and in the discipline it took to keep walking when the wind cut against her face. Ahead, there was nothing certain, only open land, cold, and the chance that the road might lead somewhere she had not yet been refused. By the middle of the pass, her strength began to thin. The horse stumbled more often, and she stopped frequently, pressing her forehead briefly against its neck, sharing warmth where little remained. The sky darkened faster than expected, clouds gathering low and heavy above the ridgeline. Snow began to fall, not gently but insistently, filling the air and dulling sound. The narrow road blurred, its edges disappearing beneath fresh white. Martha understood then that she had taken a risk greater than she first admitted to herself. Turning back no longer felt possible. Forward was uncertain, but stopping would be worse. She adjusted the grip on the reins and continued, counting steps, focusing on small distances rather than the whole of the mountain ahead. The wind strengthened as the snow thickened, pressing sideways, forcing her to lean into it. Her fingers burned with cold despite the gloves she wore, and her legs trembled from effort and fatigue. Time stretched and lost its structure. The pass felt endless, a test without witnesses, where survival depended not on courage alone, but on endurance and chance. As daylight faded, she nearly missed the lights below. At first, they seemed like a trick of exhaustion, faint and unsteady through the falling snow. She stopped, squinting against the wind, then looked again. Down in the valley, beyond the line of dark trees, a soft glow held steady. It was distant, but unmistakably real. A single house, nearly hidden by forest and terrain, stood there with lamps lit against the gathering night. The sight did not bring relief so much as a fragile possibility. She did not know who lived there, or what kind of welcome, if any, waited behind those walls. All she knew was that the lights marked shelter, and that without shelter, the mountain would finish what the day had begun. The horse lifted its head slightly, sensing the pause, and she took that as enough of a sign. Carefully, she guided them off the main road toward the descending trail. The path downward was steeper and unkind, forcing her to move slowly to avoid a fall that might end everything at once. Snow clung to her coat and hair, melting and freezing anew. Her breath came shallow now, measured to conserve what little strength remained. As she descended, the lights grew clearer, warmer against the deepening blue of evening. The forest closed in around the trail, tall pines standing silent, their branches heavy with snow. Sound vanished almost completely, replaced by the soft crunch of boots and hooves and the low rush of blood in her ears. The isolation felt complete, as though the world had narrowed to this slope, this horse, this final effort. By the time the house stood plainly before her, her legs were near to giving way. Smoke drifted faintly from a chimney, proof of fire and life within. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, resting her hand against the horse's neck once more, grounding herself in the simple reality of standing upright. She did not know yet what this place would mean for her life. She only knew that it had appeared when she had little left, and that for the first time since leaving the town behind, the future was not entirely dark.
Silas Crow lived at the edge of settled land, where the forest thickened and the roads thinned into little more than memory. His days were shaped by timber, weather, and the slow exchange of goods with distant towns. The world did not reach him easily, and he did not extend himself toward it. His house matched that life. It was built for function rather than comfort, solid against wind and snow, holding warmth because it had been taught to do so through years of hard winters. When Martha reached his door, the snow clinging to her coat and her strength nearly gone, Silas was already accustomed to reading what the land presented to him. He did not observe her with suspicion or curiosity. He saw a traveler brought low by distance and cold, someone who had reached the point where explanations would cost more energy than they were worth. Her posture, the careful way she stood as if ready to be turned away, told him enough. He did not question where she had come from or why she had waited so long to descend into the valley. He opened the door and let the heat spill outward, cutting into the cold that had followed her down from the mountain. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and dried pine, the simple proof of occupation and routine. He showed her where to set down her things and where the horse could be sheltered, his actions deliberate and unhurried, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Food was placed before her without ceremony. The meal was plain, chosen to restore rather than impress. Warmth followed, first through fire, then through thick blankets laid where she could sit and rest. He marked the space that would be hers for the night, not as an offer made in haste, but as a quiet fact. There were limits clearly held, not spoken, but established through distance and restraint. Nothing was taken from her, and nothing was implied. Martha watched closely, waiting for the shift she had learned to anticipate in other places. She remained alert, measuring each movement, bracing for the request that would come later, or the expectation that would surface once the door was closed. Silence unnerved her more than confrontation ever had. In quieter moments, she had learned that silence often hid terms that would be collected when she was weakest. But hours passed and nothing changed. The house settled into its natural sounds. The fire popped and dimmed. Wind pressed against the walls and moved on. Silas kept to his work, repairing tools and setting aside the day's remnants, never intruding on her space, never testing her presence. He treated her stay as temporary, without dismissing it as undesirable, which unsettled her in a way she could not immediately name. The night deepened, and weariness overcame vigilance.
Her body, strained beyond its limit, began to insist on rest. She lay down fully clothed, still prepared to wake at the slightest disruption. Yet sleep came without resistance. It arrived slowly, then completely, pulling her into darkness that felt unthreatening and still. For the first time in many nights, she slept without calculating escape. There were no promises given, no debts named, no warnings issued for the morning. The house held its silence, not as concealment, but as certainty. When she slept, it was not because she had surrendered control, but because nothing in the room demanded it from her.
Martha stayed. What began as a single night became a sequence of measured mornings, each one arriving without urgency or demand. Snow lingered in shaded places, retreating slowly as the light lengthened. She fell into the rhythm of the house, not by agreement, but by necessity and observation. There were simple tasks to be done, and she took them up without being asked. Wood needed stacking, water needed carrying, and the horse required steady care to regain its strength. In doing these things, she began to anchor herself to the days as they passed. The land taught her its own language. Time was no longer divided by conversations or expectations, but by temperature, cloud cover, and the angle of the sun. Some mornings broke clear and sharp, others heavy with threatened snow. She learned when the ground could be worked and when it had to be left alone. Her body adjusted to labor that was honest and predictable, work that answered directly to effort rather than approval. Silas did not insert himself into her movements. He allowed space, yet paid attention in ways that did not intrude. He noticed how she studied the terrain, how she followed lines on old maps with careful fingers. He saw the precision of her handwriting when she recorded supplies and weather patterns, noting quantities and changes as if the order of the house mattered beyond survival. These details registered with him quietly, altering the way he accounted for her presence. Martha spoke very little of herself, and when she did, it was not through explanation. Her history survived in the way she repaired torn fabric until it held stronger than before, or how she organized stores so nothing went to waste. She arranged the kitchen space to reduce movement, placed tools where they would be found without searching, and kept track of what would soon need replacing. Through these acts, she revealed a mind shaped by responsibility and foresight, one accustomed to being useful rather than visible. Days slipped by with little distinction, yet none felt empty. The house seemed to adjust around her, as though recognizing a new pattern. Meals became more regular. Work progressed without hurry. Silas accepted the changes she introduced without comment, neither resisting nor praising them, simply adapting. In this mutual restraint, something steady formed. Martha grew less wary of the quiet. The silence between tasks no longer felt like a pause before judgment. It became space in which she could think without fear of interruption. Her thoughts slowed, no longer circling the same memories with urgency. At night, she slept deeper, waking with fewer remnants of unease. She began to sense a shift within herself, subtle but undeniable. Her days were no longer arranged around avoiding disappointment or anticipating consequence. No one here tested her worth or demanded justification for her presence. She was measured only by what she chose to do and finish. The realization settled gradually, without triumph. For the first time in a long while, her life was not shaped by someone else's expectations. It moved instead to the quiet cadence of effort, weather, and light.
Marta's nights were restless, haunted by memories that crept in with the wind through the cracks in the cabin walls.
The quiet that had once felt like refuge now carried echoes of the town she had left behind, of faces turned away, and words she could not unsay. Each morning, the light over the ridge brought a fragile comfort, but the past pressed in whenever she stepped outside, tracking footprints in the snow that she feared might lead someone to this hidden place. One evening, while gathering firewood, she glimpsed a rider far along the ridge, silhouetted against the fading light. The figure moved with purpose, the horse's gait steady, and in that instant, Marta felt the fragile safety she had known begin to waver. Inside, the cabin seemed smaller, more confining, as if the walls themselves were warning her that the life she had begun to shape was not yet beyond reach of the world she had fled. The following days carried an undercurrent of tension, Marta moving through her routines with careful attention, always listening for sounds that might announce intrusion. Each task became a rhythm to anchor her, chopping wood, feeding the few animals, and tending to the small garden she had coaxed into life despite frost-bitten soil. Yet in the quiet moments, when the fire sputtered low and shadows stretched long, the memory of accusation and betrayal returned, not as a story of guilt, but as a weight pressing on her chest, reminding her that the past, however distant, was patient and persistent. Even in the presence of the calm strength she had found with Silas, the arrival of a letter, unsigned and unadorned, left her hands trembling and her mind racing through every step she had taken to reach this place. The inked words offered no comfort, only a cold reminder that her history was not her own to leave behind. Marta spent that night by the window, the lantern casting a flickering glow across her face, watching shadows shift on the snow-covered landscape, the mountains looming like silent witnesses. She pressed the letter into the palm of her hand, tracing the edges as if to measure the danger it might carry. Sleep came only in fragments, each dream weaving fragments of past injustices with imagined confrontations she had not yet faced. By dawn, she rose with a resolve hardened by fear and necessity, moving with quiet determination through the cabin, preparing for the day with the knowledge that the past could arrive on the horizon at any moment. But the shelter she had carved here, the routine she had learned, and the presence of another who recognized her worth would be her defense against whatever came. The wind shifted through the pines as she stepped outside, snow crunching underfoot, and for a brief instant, the world felt as fragile as the paper she carried, yet strong enough to hold her if only she remained vigilant and careful.
The morning air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and thawing snow across the ridge. Marta stood at the edge of the clearing, her coat pulled tight against the wind, watching the horizon where the first signs of a rider appeared. The letters and papers she had kept close in her satchel now seemed heavier, carrying the weight of expectation and accusation. Silas moved beside her, steady and deliberate, his presence a calm contrast to the storm of memories and allegations pressing in. The land stretched wide and empty beyond them, a vast arena where decisions could no longer be deferred or whispered. Each step toward the open ground was deliberate, measured, as if the soil beneath their boots could sense the gravity of choice. The rider's approach was slow but unyielding, the sound of hooves striking frozen earth echoing through the trees. Marta felt the old fear rise, the sensation of being measured and judged by forces she could neither outrun nor ignore. Silas remained still, eyes fixed on the figure, hands relaxed yet prepared, every motion precise and controlled, signaling that whatever arrived would meet a quiet but unbreakable resistance. Marta drew a deep breath, letting the cold bite at her lungs, sharpening her senses, and she realized that submission now would not erase the past, but would surrender the agency she had fought to reclaim. The open air became a crucible,
exposing the vulnerability of both, yet offering clarity. There was no shelter behind walls or within the cabin. Here, the truth of choice was inescapable. Marta moved forward, not hastily, but with intent, and Silas followed the rhythm of her resolve, ensuring her steps were supported yet undirected. The rider grew closer, letters in hand, authority carried in posture and coat, yet neither Marta nor Silas wavered. In the silent exchange across the snowy clearing, an unspoken understanding settled between them. Protection was not rescue, respect was not favor, and the law could serve as shield only if wielded with integrity. Marta held her ground, the wind tugging at her skirts, and felt a quiet affirmation ripple through her chest. The decision was not a concession to fear, but an embrace of agency, a choice to define their own terms before any external hand could impose them. Every motion, every glance, every heartbeat in the frozen expanse solidified the commitment that would shape the days to come. By standing together, visible and unguarded beneath the pale winter sun, they marked the boundary between past and future, understanding that courage was not absence of risk, but the willingness to claim life on their own terms. The rider slowed, gauging the unyielding stance of those before him, and for the first time, Marta felt the power of a choice that belonged entirely to her. The wind shifted, snow drifting in lazy spirals, and in that quiet expanse, she and Silas faced the world openly, neither shielded nor concealed, yet stronger in their shared resolve than either could have been alone.
The valley lay bathed in late summer light, each hill and meadow softened by the warmth that lingered long into the evening. The air carried the scent of wild grasses and pine, mingling with the faint smoke from the hearth where Silas tended the fire after a day of work. Marta moved through the garden and orchard, her hands tracing the growth of seedlings and the ripening of fruit, noting in her journal the patterns that had once seemed chaotic but now held meaning in their slow unfolding. The addition to the house, built under Silas's quiet guidance, had become her sanctuary, a place where her thoughts could gather, her words could take shape, and her hands could create without the pressure of scrutiny. The children she taught returned each morning, faces bright with curiosity, learning letters, numbers, and the rhythms of the land that shaped their days. Marta found in their presence a reflection of her own reclamation, the slow stitching together of confidence and agency she had feared lost forever. Silas moved among them and the land with the same steady rhythm, his presence a constant but unobtrusive support, allowing Marta to grow in her own space while sharing the responsibilities of their homestead. Days passed in deliberate cycles, tending livestock, repairing fences, gathering firewood, planting and harvesting. Each action held purpose, and each evening closed with a shared calm, the work of the day leaving them exhausted but rooted, connected to the soil and to each other. The valley, once wild and indifferent, seemed to accept them, responding to care and attention with growth and stability. Marta walked the fields at dusk, feeling the earth firm beneath her boots, noticing how the light caught on the river and the tips of the grasses, how the mountains stood in patient permanence. Silas worked beside her without words, the quiet understanding between them filling the spaces that once carried fear or uncertainty. Together they built more than a home. They built a life measured in labor, respect, and mutual recognition, each action affirming the choice to remain, to create, to endure. The days stretched long and rich, marked with small victories and subtle joys. A child learning to write a letter, a fence mended before the next storm, a loaf of bread browned perfectly in the oven, the stars rising over the mountains in silent witness.
With each passing season, the land became not only a refuge, but a foundation, holding them firmly as they shaped their future together. Their presence on the valley floor was quiet but undeniable, a testament to resilience, to trust, and to the power of choice over circumstance. The past, once a shadow at every step, receded into memory, and the valley, accepting and steady, became a place where growth, love, and dignity could coexist, nurtured by hands and hearts willing to endure. The story of Marta and Silas closed not with certainty, but with the calm and enduring pulse of life reclaimed, of a home made through patience, care, and the deliberate act of staying. For more stories of resilience, love, and the quiet strength of the frontier, subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales.